Resilience is an interesting concept. A lot of people confuse it with toughness, but no. Personally, I don't like that comparison. To my mind, resilience is about recovery, not durability. Resistance to trauma is completely different than recovery from trauma. But I can see where the confusion stems from. Like a lot of the topics that I like to discuss, there's always a problem with the word. There's an issue with the definition. Mindset, motivation, discipline, resistance, recovery, resilience, toughness. All of these words tend to have a moving target for a definition. And that's problematic. Pop culture has divorced a lot of these words from their very specific literal definitions. But they're used incorrectly and inaccurately by people who like the sentiment but don't necessarily have the correct meaning. As a writer and an English major, I don't really like when that happens. But I understand why it does happen. Resilience is a recent victim of this type of thinking. The meaning has been lost because people like the word, but they're not necessarily using it based on its actual definition. Why I see it as a problem is because if you want one of these qualities, like resilience, for instance, you have to have a clear definition of what that quality is in order to properly train for it. This is how I have approached every single facet of personal development and self-improvement. What do I want to be? What is the word for it? What's the definition? How does that apply to me? How do I achieve it? Is my belief in alignment with the meaning? If I can reconcile all of that, then I'm good to go. But if any of them don't connect, then I still have some work to do. I need to research all the definitions of the words involved in the goals that I set for myself. And once I find all those definitions, I need to make sure that they're actually in alignment with one another for what I'm trying to achieve. Resilience has been showing up a lot in my social media feeds. Or it would be resilience if that's what it meant, but it doesn't, so it isn't. All of these memes are actually referencing the qualities of toughness or the state of durability. They're not really speaking to resilience. And because of that, a lot of people that are striving to build resilience aren't going to be able to, because they're aiming for a target that doesn't exist. All because of intellectual laziness and taking definitions for granted. Think of it this way. There are two qualities that you have to consider when it comes to dealing with trauma. First, your ability to withstand trauma. Literally, your threshold before trauma overwhelms you. Second, your ability to recover from trauma that has overwhelmed you. What's your capacity to bounce back? And this can get even more granular because some people experience trauma from what other people would call a very low level of stimulus, whereas others, they have a high threshold before anything is considered trauma to them. But we can discuss all that another time, because what I really want to focus on is resilience and why the definition is so important and why it has broader implications as far as how we relate to the words we use in our day-to-day lives. Because accurate or inaccurate definitions will factor in to everything that we do and whether we're going to be successful. And that's why looking at resilience as not so much the ability to withstand trauma, but more as the ability to recover from trauma is so important. Why does this matter though? Who cares, right? Well, I care, and I hope you do too. Especially if you're a person who is in a position where you're supposed to be fostering resilience in people that you're trying to help. This could be a parent, it could be a coach, it could be a teacher, it could be a professor. It doesn't matter what the actual title is. What matters is that you're responsible for building resilience into another human being. And if you don't have the correct definition, that's problematic for everyone involved. If that onus is on you, but your definition is flawed, then your outcomes are going to be flawed as well. And that could significantly set someone back in their development. And that's not what we're trying to accomplish. Because one of the most interesting things about resilience is that the more of it you have pre-trauma, the less of it you'll actually use post-trauma. If you're already quite resilient and that gets challenged, you'll use less of that capacity to recover from something traumatic. But the less resilient you are before a trauma occurs, the more of that limited resource you will use to recover. See how that's a problem? It's kind of a cruel irony in a lot of ways. The people that have a lot of it use less of it. The people that don't have a lot of it use all of it. So that leads into a follow-up question. Are you resilient or no? Because people who are not particularly resilient to begin with are relatively easy to identify. The smallest barriers to an outcome seem insurmountable, and everything is a trauma to them. Using today's language, they're what you would describe as being easily triggered. But there are triggers, and then there are triggers. These folks, their triggers get air quotes, because if you're living your life and finding yourself triggered by everything around you, then your problem is probably you. Because having an emotional response to literally everything that's going on around you is a surefire way not to build resilience. And the reason for that is because unchecked emotion is a barrier to resilience. And a lot of people might not like it when they hear that statement, but that doesn't make it less true. And those people, they're probably not very resilient. Because at the core of resilience is an intellectual grasp of the process. And resilience is entirely about process. That's why we can cultivate resilience by doing things that challenge us or make us feel uncomfortable, but only when they don't overwhelm us and leave us with a sense of learned helplessness. And the best term I've ever heard applied to these exercises or activities designed to challenge or make us uncomfortable is what's known as hedonic reversal, which you either understand immediately as soon as you hear those two words together, or you need to look both of those words up and connect the definitions to make any sense of that statement at all. And you know what? That'll be good practice for you.